Welcome back, Sam. It's so good to see you again on the show.
Corey, it's great to be here.
And so, first off, we have to do a quick what's been going on since last we spoke, because I imagine it's been a little bit of a whirlwind because your book is, I hear about it from a bunch of different people. So I'm assuming you're in the midst of lots of conversations about it.
It's awesome. Yes, there are so many people who want to have this conversation, which I'm grateful for. It's not surprising on one level, right? How do we embody sexuality well as men? That is, I think, the cry of of good men's hearts, and which is most men actually. They want to find a way to live this well and be a good man, and it's the rare guy that doesn't care. So it's been great to just see men and women just they want to have a conversation about this, and I've actually gotten to meet some men that know you and know of your show who journeyed further into their own kind of sexual embodiment through
Mhm.
some of your work. And so it's been fun to fist bump, so to speak, out there in the world.
Well, it is one of those. It's such a vital conversation. For sure, just needs to take place because that's the one thing I've loved about the message as it's reverberating from your book, and then just the message within it is it's not like there's this element of you've taken a stance with, hey, listen up, here's step one, two, three, I've got the answers, this is the way it's going to be. Instead, it's what if we look at this a little bit differently? What if this maybe leans a little bit more and it's nuanced.
Yeah.
Whereas I think when we get into the topic of sex and sexuality, particularly among us religious folk, it
Right.
really becomes it's got to be black or white only. You know, it's
Yep.
a black and white thing. It's right or it's wrong. Other than
Right.
wait a second, are you sure?
Right. Yeah, when guys come into therapy, and I'm sure you experience this too, often the only way they know to think about their sexuality, especially the religious ones, is am I behaving or not behaving? It's the one that's what they think you're asking when you ask them about
Right.
their sexuality is I'm behaving. They don't know how to think about it in deeper, fuller ways about their own embodiment, or as we talked about, sensuality or story. There's nothing about desire and how to steward desire or bring that into a relationship. So yeah, there's this whole world of sexuality that's left out of the behaving, not behaving conversation.
Yeah, I had this recently in a conversation where we were on the subject of masturbation, and husband was in the midst of nothing, no paraphernalia, no internet, no phone, nothing, just kind of enjoying. Wife walks in, and so I'm like, unpack that. What was your dialogue in your head? Were you doing something wrong or not? And in your terminology now, were you behaving or were you
Yeah.
misbehaving? Right. And it's an
Yeah.
interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to think through to where I think, and this, I'm going to speak as me, not necessarily as Dr. Corey here, but this is just my own personal journey as a man. I want to live my life, particularly my sexuality, shame free, right? So the things that I choose to do, if caught, quote unquote, it's not my shame that's getting tapped into here. It's the whole, okay, wait, that took me off guard, honey. I wasn't prepared for that. Now we can have a more nuanced conversation within it rather than how could you?
I think if you can open up that realm, as you obviously invited this guy to do, towards curiosity,
Hmm.
right? To like be able to, behavior is meaningful. We're not just
Yes.
animals, right? And
Yes.
so
Yes.
what we do, it may not be conscious, but what we do is intentional. It has meaning. And so being able to sit with the curiosity of what is this about for me? Right? And have that space outside of the flinch of shame, right? To get away from the boyish bad behavior approach, right? Which is, I'm caught and I just need to like shut down and not think about it. But instead to sit and reflect as you invited him to do, like, what was this about?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
What
great
tell
question.
me the story and then also tell me what you think her story is. What's her dialogue? You know, what's her inner mental world that's going on? And because both of those realms matter concurrently, right? That it's like because again, this is the framework how you just started today with There's a think of it as in the terms of a bell curve, right? You got the one end of the extreme of men that am I behaving or misbehaving? And I'm trying to, it's almost a disassociation of myself. I don't even embody anything. And then you got the other end that's the machismo. They're just in it for
Right.
what they want. That's all. They don't care about whoever they're with. It's just about them. And those are
Good.
small percentages, whereas a majority of that bell curve encompasses most men, in my
Right.
experience,
Yep. I
that
would
are
agree.
like, I'm trying to be good, loving, caring. I
Yes.
care and respect my wife. I care and respect women. Right? And I want to live that. And so it's this motivation of how do I make sure the pendulum is leaning towards the goodness side of me while also in context with those that I am around and their goodness and
Yep.
what's good for them.
Yes. Yeah, well said. To think in terms of relational terms, right? Both to yourself, how am I integrated with my own body, with my own sexuality, as well as just in relationship, your impact to those around you, and being able to sit with that relational impact versus just that kind of good boy,
Yeah.
bad boy
Yeah.
mentality, which is I don't care or I care too much and it's all about behaving, right?
Right. Yeah, because the downside of that, tell me if you keep seeing this too. The downside of that produces the Dr. Glover nice guy concept. It's covert, it's not felt, it's not experienced. Because this is the one thing I have discovered in doing mastermind groups and working with men for 2 decades now is a wife really wants a man that can stand for himself, that can take
Yes.
stances on
Yes.
things and stand up for himself even to her, in some instances of wait, hold on a sec. I don't know if I completely agree. And you do that in a respectable way. That's something you can kind of take your cue from and feel and experience more than whatever you want, honey. Happy wife, happy life, and all that mess.
Right. Right. Like a second mom almost to him, right? Like the
Right. She doesn't need another child in the house.
right. Right. And it's I know it's a trope, but it is I think what you're saying is well said. Like, man with a sense of self, man with voice, a man with what I would call, true virility, which is
Hmm.
not genital oriented per se, right? But
Right.
heart oriented, that
Right.
he's alive, he knows who he is, he knows what he wants, but he's open to other people. He's not rigid or shut down, but he's also not like absent
Yeah.
and vacuous, right? Like he's
Yeah.
got bump up against something. I would agree that, when I'm sitting counseling with couples, women want to be able to bump up against something.
Hmm.
Both for love and sexuality, right? To have somebody that's virile and passionate, but also somebody that will relate with them and interact with them and challenge them or just
Right.
wrestle out life with them.
Right. Yeah. I think that's an operative word there is the challenge. I think all of us, we want the relationship that's comfortable, but also deep down, we know we need that relationship that's challenging
Yes. Yeah.
because that makes us both better.
Yes. Agreed. Right. Right. That's how we mature together, right? That's how we can actually be friends to each other.
Yeah, because there's somebody that spurs me on. I mean, this is what I use when I get a chance to speak. I'll ask the audience a lot of times of how many of you are better because of your relationship now than you were in the early parts of your relationship. Or the other corollary question is how many of you are better lovers in bed
Yeah.
now, further into the relationship than you were when you first started this
Right.
relationship. And usually most hands will go up. It's like, yeah, I figured some things out because they almost required I do.
Right. Right. I think of, but Schnarch's
Hmm.
material, Passionate Marriage, where he says, we have this image that like, the most kind of sexually potent, right? Men are these
Right.
20-year-olds, right?
Right.
With testosterone. And he says in his book, Passionate Marriage, it's actually the 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-olds
Yeah.
have the greatest sexual potential because they actually have a sense of self.
Right.
I mean, that sentence blew me away, and yet I got it right away. And I was like, "Thank you for saying that." Right? Like that. There's something about your sexuality isn't painted on; it's more embodied. It's not this
Right.
thing you're trying to prove about yourself. You know, you have a self that can then be in relationship. It can actually be intimacy. Um,
Yeah.
so
Because
just
without that, there's nothing there.
right.
Right, to use his terminology too, of his
That's
instant
right.
erections don't go very far other than the erection. There's nothing
Right.
really there attached to it.
Right.
And
That's
the
right.
converse is true with women of, wait, the ability of a more mature woman to be able to go, I know that what I am capable of. I know who I am. I mean, that's a woman that will invoke a lot of feelings. Some of them are real enticing, and some can be a little bit scary.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but that's a
You
good
should
thing. That's a good recipe.
exactly. Right. You should want to be moved
Yeah,
by your partner, right? And challenged,
yeah,
vice versa. And I think it is the man with a sense of self that can welcome a mature woman,
right.
right? And not be intimidated by her power, not be intimidated by her initiation or her desire or her presence or her
Hmm.
struggles, but can actually welcome her challenges in a good
No,
way.
absolutely, because that's so interesting. Because even as we're sitting here talking about this early on in the beginnings of Sexy Marriage Radio, so we're talking 10, 12 years ago, because it's 13 years in as we're recording this, and
Cool.
I would make the comment, and I still think I believe it somewhat, but it's evolving of a husband's one of the big complaints I would hear from husbands a lot is I want a sexually alive and vibrant wife,
Yeah.
right? That one that truly does embody like what we're describing, that truly brings her full sexual power and prowess. And there's a part of me that is usually come back at, if she did, I think you would freak out. I think it would scare you. But now that I'm 53, time of this recording, I know I'm more capable of handling Pam in that regard than I would have been at 43 10 years ago. There would have been
Yep.
a part of me going, uh-oh, I don't know if everything will work the way it's supposed to satisfy that for her. And now it's like, it don't matter if things work or not like it's supposed to, because I'll still be engaged. I can still do things. I can still be there because I'm more in tune with me. And I'm good.
Yes.
I'll be all right. And so I think it's kind of shifting a little bit, but there's still that element of, if we both ever really show up, it does bring about that awe, that, whoa, there's something deeper and more profound, not just what the way the world would often propose it, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah, early on in my marriage to my wife Amanda, we've been married 21 years now, and I'm 45 at the time of this recording. But early on, we married at 20. I was 24, and it took me 10 to 15 years to be able to welcome
Yeah.
her desire towards me. And
Right.
we had to work through some wounds that I gave her in the early years of our marriage, where I would, when she would come at me, I would bristle and
Yeah.
and freeze, because she would bring her passion and her desire towards me for affection as well as sexual passion. And if I wasn't in control and initiating, I couldn't handle it. I didn't know. I just got overwhelmed with that. And it took actually going back into my own story of sexual formation,
Hmm.
understand just, the impact of my understanding of women, the impact of women in my life, to get free of some places my body was locked up and defensive against women, to be able to start to welcome my wife. And it took, probably 15 years in, I would say, I finally was able to shed the tears that she needed
Yeah.
around some of those wounds and say, I get it now.
Yeah.
Get that I was not a man who could handle you. And that was my insecurity. And I see why you felt rejected. Thankfully, since then, continuing to grow, to be able to that place of synergy that you're naming so well, like I can be present for whatever happens and be a good lover to you,
Yeah.
come what
No,
may.
you're describing a similar journey
Wow.
my end too, that it's just this, yeah, that really overlaps in a lot of ways because there's this element of exposure that you don't know early on, and that's where the book you've got is important because it's helping reshape some of the overstory here within the spiritual and the religious, that it's important, I think, that we recognize the attempts in the ways this topic has been approached, well-meaning or not, they are
Mm,
what they have happened. And so now it's how do we start getting a more nuanced, understood, curious, at least maybe it helps people personalize it more rather than permission seeking
mhm,
or good behavior only or purity only, because some of
mm.
those are so narrow.
Yeah. Yeah, they may be necessary for a time. Some of those behavioral structures may help you in the midst of some ongoing compulsive sexual behavior, but they're not meant to be the end. And we set them up as like this is just what you're going to need as a man. Is you're going to need you're just going to always be, at the limits of falling into sexual sin or sexual temptation or lust, and behaving and not behaving is kind of all you need.
Right. Right.
And everything else is going to work, and you
Just
don't need to.
behave. Yeah, just behave, and you'll get your cookie at the end, right?
We didn't talk about how sex is a skill-based behavior.
Right. Yeah, because
Actually,
it's so much more nuanced. Because that's what you were just talking about on the this is passionate marriage too. Because I'm reading through it again, and I love the framework of it. Just brought back to mind the way he wants to approach sex education, even in the
yeah,
sense that if my kids were listening to this, I would say this out loud with them here too. But if my 19 to 17-year-olds were listening, I would be like, you know what, your mom and I, we've been working at this thing for 31 years and we still haven't figured sex out. We still don't know all that it is. It can be, right? That it's much more nuanced than just a simple bodily function. It's so much more, and it's getting into the willingness to be curious, which then pivots us to another thing I want to bring up with you, just to kind of I want to wander through and see where we land, because you even mentioned it just a minute ago on this whole concept of lust, because the good behavior among us Christians, when Jesus said that, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. That the way that it gets interpreted and the way that lands really impacts the behavior aspect
yes,
of our systems and the way our body is. And so I want to
yeah,
kind of let's unpack and kind of talk through this.
yeah, yeah. That famous passage, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. The best. Oh, let me just start with the bad ways it gets interpreted. I think, right, which is, if I look at a woman, I'm probably lusting, and I need to shut down what happens inside of me and look away. And I need to just
Right.
always, the famous bounce your eyes. I need to always be looking away, like split seconds of looking at a woman, and then I need to be turning. And it so for a man, it sets up this idea of like you are that close to always lusting, and whatever goes on in you is probably lust, and you need to shut it down, and you need to get better at just not looking at women, period. um and on the
Right.
other side it sets up, and I'll thank Sheila Agor on this. She describes how for women the torture is it sets women up to feel the shame of I'm seductive, I'm invoking all this, I'm dirty, I'm invoking all
Right.
this lust in you. And the
I'm
also
the gatekeeper for you also,
right,
really? Yeah.
right, and that, unless a man gets fed his copious amounts of sexual fulfillment, right? That sets up sex as this obligation to make sure he's not sinning, and
Right.
does not arise from desire. Then even the sense that women then don't get men's faces. They don't get men relating with them in
Right.
churches because men are so set up to believe, and this is going to fall into lust, and um there's no way for men to mature into how to just, respect women and have healthy relationship and also trust their bodies. And the best definition of that passage that I've heard, the best translation, put it this way, that the implication there is that there's an intention to go on looking for
Okay.
objectification, that it's not just looking,
Right.
but that
It's not the
there's
notice. It's not this I see them
right,
and there's a bodily response to it because there can still even be an arousal that comes from things in our world. And in this case, we're talking about another human being because this is going to be mine. I'm kind of jumping in and maybe we're not
it's
quite on the
great.
same line, which is awesome. We'll figure out where we are. But
Yeah,
because I get the opportunity to on a dating platform where I come in a couple times a month at times and do a table talk with anybody that wants to
cool.
join. And so it's single people and it's Christian based. And anytime this topic comes up, boy, it gets really dicey and judgy in the chat. And and so there becomes this element of, okay, wait, if you see something beautiful, this is what you talk about in the book. If you see something
Yes.
beautiful and your body reacts to it, have
Yes.
you done anything wrong, or is that just the way the biology works? Is that the way the whole neurons in your brain from your eyes that are also attached to all the other aspects of your body fire? I mean, because in some ways, that's what's supposed to happen.
Right. Right.
Right.
Preach, man. I
Right.
mean, yes, we are for sure on the same page there. That noticing, even being moved, right, as you're naming, even feeling arousal in your body of wow, that is a beautiful woman. Right? That act is not inherently sinful. That's natural. But there's a wiring towards beauty, other
Yep.
people,
Yep.
the beauty of other people and their bodies and their presence. And I think, that's why I call out that part, that translation, Jesus' words, which is going on looking with the intent to, fantasize and carry that forward into your own sexual gratification. In other words,
Yeah.
which a lot of the guys that I've walked with who struggle, particularly here, sexualizing or objectifying in, the more addicted space, would say at that point I don't even see a woman, I just see body parts.
Right.
They would describe, like, look at that pair,
Yep.
check out that butt, right? They're not even
Yep.
seeing the person anymore. They're
Right.
not noticing beauty.
Which that's for sure in line with what Jesus is saying.
Yes, right.
That now we're in that category of, okay, that's a pretty clear distinction of that's now we're not talking about a person. That's the disrespectful, that's the lustful, that's the
Yes.
sinful because it's no longer a child of God.
Right. You're doing something that is making them other than they are.
Yeah.
And you're not respecting them as a person who has a life and story and relationships. And man, I think there's a beautiful way to reverence people. And then there's another way to use people. And
Right.
where is that line? I think it's appropriate to say that's what you need to be curious about within yourself.
Right. Yeah, that's where you got to land on what hits you because I think we all know. Let me rephrase it. I know when I'm heading towards a line. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I'm astute enough of my tendencies to know.
Oh,
Yep, I'm heading straight towards that. Might need to change, or yeah, no, I'm not going to. But at least if I can make it more conscious, now I'm more empowered on how I go about things. But I came across, I can't remember, this was an article I found online where they equated the word that Jesus used, lust, to coveting. So it's almost
yes.
like ownership, which fits the context of the time of, because in a lot of instances, sadly, back then, women were more property, right? They were just they were sold, bartered for, in a sense of, hey, yeah, you get this, here's your dowry, and on it goes. It's not like it's not an equal thing, which is why the equally yoked help meet is such a profound statement in scriptural context of, wait a second, this woman has just as much value
Yes.
as a man, which back then would blown everybody's mind.
Right, the
Right.
image of Eden was a king and a queen, not
Right.
just a king with property, right? But a king and a
Right.
queen who both
Right. And
ruled.
so I've loved the framework of that to help with the curiosity of, okay, if I now am looking at somebody as if I own or they belong or I am using, to use your
Yes.
terminology, that fits that context of more than, wow, that is beautiful.
Mhm. Right, and it have been my article. I wrote an article like a couple weeks ago on lust and
Okay.
the concept being the biblical concept, either that or fist bump to the other writer, that the biblical concept, in 10 commandments was don't covet your neighbor's spouse like property. Just
Right.
like you wouldn't covet their donkey or their servants, right? Like don't that's a kind of property or objectification treatment of people. Um, you know, versus I told a story in the article about, I was at Costco pumping gas and just looked up, I'm pumping gas, looked around at my fellow club members, Costco club members, and the pump over was a very beautiful woman, well dressed. And my heart said, wow. My heart and my body, my whole being said, wow. And, I uh knew enough. I didn't want to ditch into lust. I didn't want to covet her. So where I went with it was, what does she move in me? And
Okay.
what's happening in me as I'm noticing her beauty, right? And again, you don't have to do that. You could say wow and move on, right? But I wanted to be aware of like what stirs in me, and where it took me was two places. First, I was suddenly aware of my body's tiredness. Like it
Okay.
connected me to my body, my core needs. And then I noticed that she was well dressed, and it was evening. And I imagined like, the picture was maybe she's going to like a nice dinner or some event in the evening, right? And I found myself, like, I want a beautiful life. I want to be a
Okay.
well kept man. And today I don't feel like it. I feel
Okay.
tired and a bit ragged by my job or life or whatever was going on. I don't remember. And so I think there is this step as well into what's what are you being moved with, right? Because a lot of times that shift, I would say, from lust to awe is that need to connect to some of your core,
Right.
your own body, your core needs in the moment.
Right. Well, because you even are hinting at, if you're using the whole addictive terminology, just as a quick, I'm going to detour back. See, I think this will land, that it's the halt, right? The hungry, angry,
Only
tired
tired. Yes.
are the times when we will turn to vices most often. And so when I'm tired, it's easier to notice something and then go sideways with it because it medicates something, rather than, like you're describing, how do I use some self confronting self awareness of what's going on with me here? Okay, so it's tired. All right. What's restorative? Well, going down that thought process isn't restorative, but maybe steering it towards my wife is. Maybe actually just kicking my feet up and resting is.
Hmm.
Maybe,
Hmm.
now I got different options on how to deal with it. Whereas I think a lot of us men, I come across this with my clients and for sure with my own life. I felt like I only had one or two avenues to take care of all of my angsts, rather than, no, I got a lot. I just have to have the willingness to explore.
Right. Right. So back to that need to connect to your own body and be curious there. What am I being stirred to do? What am I noticing as I because sexual arousal does bring us back into our bodies. It's one way, right? If you see a beautiful person, you will be aware of your own body probably because it will be talking to you. And through arousal or through just the awe of beauty of a
And a
person.
quick note, if you're not aware of your body, that's something you need to become more aware of. Let's just add
Yes.
that fact.
Yes. Exactly. And to understand that a kind of behaving, not behaving conversation doesn't really get you into your body. It doesn't get you curious about what's going on there. And that day I probably needed, to get a nap, sleep,
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
care of myself in some way, right? Just it invited me back to live like a dignified person, like I saw this woman living like. And, um, yeah, I think that's what beauty is meant to stir in us. We want to become more than we are.
Yeah. Yeah. That because it draws us into something bigger.
Yeah,
Which
right.
that's our sexuality in a lot of ways, isn't it? If you talk about it in a marital context, that's the thing I love the most is in the context and the conversations I can have where one of the things I just absolutely admire about marriage is particularly married sex, but just marriage in general. It takes me places I can't go on my own.
Yeah, that's well said.
That
Right.
it's I get to experience more because of that covenant together,
Yes.
because of that collaboration, that partnership, that spurring, everything we've been talking about today, the
Yes.
challenge, the support, all of it
Yes. Yes.
it just adds to what I can experience.
Yes. Right. In other words, sex as something that you rise to. I mean, talk about, I experienced that in our marriage, Amanda and I, that there's something about rising to sex and romance,
Yeah.
right? Out of the daily
Yeah.
business of life, right? That this is a place we get to rise out of that. And I get to experience something of her mystery, something of her curiosity about me, her beauty, right? And again, the undoing of an orgasm, right?
Yeah.
Right? That like being undone by another person that you're both not just physically intimate, but relationally, emotionally intimate with, right? That practice of vulnerability, of being
Right.
able to let go into an orgasm. I mean, yes, I believe that can change us, transform us, as you're saying so well.
I think that's the beauty of marriage. That's the beauty of long-term relationship is it's an ongoing process. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
goes back to the idea of who's better after they've been married a while. Right?
Right.
If I'm looking at things well in the manner I think both of us look at it as is a process of growth, a process of character development, wisdom development, improvement of self in a lot of ways. And if I look at it, of course, I'm going to develop better in that crucible than I will any other place.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I reminds me of there's a line from sex educator Emily Nagoski,
Hmm.
who she writes in her book, As You Are, this line about married sex or partnered sex. And she says, your partner is not an animal to be hunted for sustenance. The secret keeper whose mysterious depths are infinite.
That's
And you're
good.
like, wow, that's 1,000-pound sentence, right?
That's a huge statement. Yes.
Your partner is not an animal to be hunted for sustenance. Sex is not just a feed me,
Right.
but your partner is a mystery keeper whose depths are infinite.
Right.
Meaning like, whoa, right? This is a place you can go explore and you will never run out of more to
Hmm.
discover about your partner. And
Hmm.
also to have discovered about you, which is that beautiful maturing of a long-term relationship is you're invited to both your struggles, your shortcomings, but also to be seen
Yeah.
and have somebody witness your life and know you and give you feedback and love you and be drawn and moved by
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
Interesting, the word lust that Jesus uses, the Greek word, I think it's like epithumia or something like that. But he uses it elsewhere in positive terms. So he describes when he's having the last supper for his crucifixion, he says, "Have lusted to have this meal with you." The word is translated eagerly desired.
Right.
Right? In other words, a deep and passionate
Right.
desire.
Right.
to have this meal. It's used elsewhere. The writer Peter, it's on how the angels have longed to understand the revelations of God, right? So there's all these passages where it can be a positive thing.
Hmm.
This idea of lust. And, I talked about this before we recorded. The culture at large has a place for healthy lust, healthy passion, healthy desire. I think there is something about, even in healthy married partnerships, right? That this idea of how to feel eagerly desired, or you
Yeah.
get the chance to feel eagerly desired and cultivate that passion for each other. I mean, I think that's another one of those incredible gifts.
Yeah. Well, there's the next book, Sam. Healthy Lust.
Here we go.
Man, this has been good. How can people find you if this is the first time they're hearing about you?
It's great. You can come to my website, samjolman, JOLMAN.com. I also write on Substack, samjolman.substack.com, Instagram, or your favorite social media. I'm also there.
So good, man. And the book, you can find the book anywhere books are sold. I already know that. So, man, this has been fun. I appreciate the conversation again, and so grateful for all the work you're doing, man.
Thank you, Dr. Corey. This has been rich.